July Lunch and Learn. I am Amanda Lakin, Director of Communications and Marketing for the Coalition. And as always, I have just a few announcements for all of you. First of all, we will be recording this session. We'll be sharing the link to the recording and any slides before the end of the week. If you do have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box or the chat. We'll be monitoring both of those. And for those of you who are interested in our conference, I just want to remind everyone that our early bird rate for registration is expiring this coming Monday, July 31st. We won't be extending the deadline, so if you're wanting to get that $50 off, I highly recommend registering on Monday. Starting Tuesday, August 1st, these rates will increase by $50. If you are not aware of our conference, this is our biggest event of the year. It is the largest affordable housing event in Nevada, I believe. And it's just 2 days of great education, collaboration, and a networking opportunity. So we do want this event to be inclusive. If you are looking for a scholarship, we do have a limited number available. So you can apply with us. I'll put my email in the chat. And we also do have sponsorship opportunities available. So we love our sponsors. They really help us provide a great event to all of our attendees. And we have different opportunities available. So I will be sharing with you in the chat once I'm done talking, a link to register for our conference, our current conference agenda, and again, my email for any questions. And secondly, I just want to flag for our members that on July 19th, we did send out to all of you our final report on our legislative session. Hopefully everyone had a chance to see that. This is just a benefit that we offer to our members. You'll see that from about February to July this year, we provided all of our members with 9 legislative updates. We hosted 1 virtual update meeting. We had 3 calls to action, which were very well received. And again, we created this final report. So if this is something that interests you and you're not a member, I would just encourage you to consider membership with us as we roll into our interim. And now, without further ado, I am going to turn it over to our newest coalition teammate, Amanda Vaskov. She is our Government Affairs and Policy Manager. Welcome, Amanda.
Hi, so happy to be a new member of the team and be here for my first Lunch and Learn with the Coalition. So a little bit of an overview of the legislative session. We as a state came into it with some interesting dynamics. First off, we came into it with a $11.4 billion budget for the next biennium, and that's a more significant budget than usual. Part of that was because coming out of COVID, we had a great year for entertainment, which is something that is expected to continue even after this biennium. And there was also some leftover one-shot funds from COVID. We also had a period of divided government. There was a democratically controlled supermajority assembly and a democratically controlled majority Senate with a Republican-led governor. So of course, there's some competing interests there. And overall, 51% of all bills introduced in each house were eventually signed. And all of these interesting dynamics were what contributed to some of the outcomes that we'll talk about today. And with that, I'll pass it off to our first panelist to talk about AB 310. I'll pass it off to Brooke Page, Director Southwest at CSH.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda. Hello to our coalition members and all that's joining us today. Brooke Page with the Corporation for Supportive Housing. And I'm going to give an overview of what initially started off as a BDR that earlier this year, BDR 25-1032 that transitioned into Assembly Bill 310, but has now been adopted as NRS Chapter 48 is where you can find the Nevada Supportive Housing Development Fund. So we're really excited. Thank you to everyone who supported this effort to get this bill introduced and through the legislative session. And what the development fund is it's essentially an opportunity for us to provide the full package of what it's going to take to get people who may be experiencing homelessness, or maybe they are at risk of experiencing homelessness, the tools and the resources to provide that permanent, stable housing for them, using this fund as a way to bridge the gap to some of the financing and the services, resources that are needed to pencil supportive housing developments. And so we are grateful to Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe-Moreno, who was our bill sponsor, and all of the legislative elected officials who helped us pass this legislation. It was pretty much passed unanimously. There was one person that did not vote for it, but essentially it was pretty close to unanimous. And then Governor Lombardo, we had a signing event, which you can see the picture here on the screen for those that participated in that signing event. And so just some key features of this legislation that are really important is one, we are going to have an opportunity now to measure supportive housing in Nevada and track who gets access to these resources and the impact that this funding is going to have on their lives. We hope to find out if there's a cost effectiveness here in Nevada, which we know there is in other states that have proven that, but we're excited to have that data here in our home state. This is going to be in partnership with the Interagency Council on Homeless to Housing, who will be involved in the process to award the grants. So those folks in our rural Nevada, frontier Nevada, northern, southern, those that want to develop supportive housing can apply for this fund. Once it's created and developed, it's going to be administered through the Nevada Housing Division. And so we're, working with them, and they are working behind the scenes to help develop the policy that's going to help get this grant out the door. And so, yeah, so we've got also another important feature of this is one-shot funding that was provided by the legislature, $32.2 million. So we're grateful for that tranche of resource. But what's great about this is that doesn't have to be the only resource. There are other multiple fund sources that can contribute to this fund. We can apply for grants, philanthropy, our corporate sponsors can contribute to this effort using this fund. So really some really important features there. Other key features here is just, again, the full package. What does it take to get somebody off the street or out of a crisis response situation? This fund can help pay for those resources to address outreach, staffing, to provide tenancy support services for tenants in their home, so we can help people stay stably housed once they actually get access to housing. We can also help incentivize landlords and really provide even operating supports to keep people stably housed. Also, we really want to help use this one tranche of resource to build the field. There's some really great folks out there that are doing this really important work already. We want to help them be sustainable in this work. So there's capacity building opportunities to build the capacity of our service providers, our developers, property managers, the folks that are in the trenches every day. We want to be able to help ensure that they've got ongoing funding and sustainable resources to do this work. So there's Catalyst resources. And we also want to align this funding to other resources in our state that can help maximize these dollars, things like Medicaid or other fund sources through our Division of Public and Behavioral Health may have resources that can help really support the ongoing sustainability of this program. So those are just some key features. Lastly, I just want to kind of show what the impact of this bill and what it can do. And so we know that folks, that it's way more expensive to keep people cycling in and out of the jails and our hospitals and our crisis response systems than it is to put them into a permanent housing solution. So we know that by developing this intervention in our state, scaling it, we can stop that vicious cycle and get people into permanent housing. And what we've seen in other states is the cost effectiveness of this intervention. For example, in Denver, they've shown over $25,000 cost savings per person per year for the folks that participated in supportive housing, in the supportive housing social impact bond study in Denver. And then in Arizona, the Medicaid program has seen over a $65,000 per member per year savings for members that were in supportive housing. So their Medicaid program has seen significant savings. So we really want to be able to leverage these best practices across the country, develop our program here in Nevada, and show the impact of this work, because ultimately this is about people. This is about saving lives. And we know that people in supportive housing, they stay housed, they increase their income, their health improves, they stay stably housed, they get connected to community and to resources. And that is a win for Nevada and a win for our community. So really important features. We thank you so much again for your support, and we hope that we can have opportunities to collaborate on this policy. So thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to you, Amanda.
Thanks so much, Brooke. So moving away from the supportive housing side of things, I'll hand it over to Amanda Moss, Senior Director of Government Affairs of the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association, to talk a little bit more about the entitlement process and the land use side of things.
Thanks, Amanda. Good afternoon, everyone. As Amanda mentioned, my name is Amanda Moss, Senior Director of Government Affairs for the Southern Nevada Home Builders. SNHBA has been incredibly optimistic, encouraged, and inspired by how many federal, state, and local conversations have been about housing, not only subsidized housing, but also the overall housing supply and the housing continuum. According to most recent estimates from Freddie Mac, the United States is short almost 4 million units of housing. And when adding in our undercounted homeless population, that number increases to 7 million housing needs. And I know I don't have to tell everyone on this call that we have an affordability crisis to the tune of 96.5 million Americans, which is about a third of America that cannot afford the median price of a new home. And we have numbers that are much worse here in Nevada. But, you know, when we look at policies, every national report, every national group, ULI, APA, even our National Association of Home Builders have outlined a similar list of successful policies that have been implemented across the nation to address these problems. And we're here to talk about two of them today. One is land use and planning. So nationally, states are either empowering local governments or preempting them from establishing policy housing discrimination or NIMBYism policies, not in my backyard. You know, they address parking reductions, things like that. And the other is timeframes and streamlining processes. And this is done at all levels of government. A very recent example is our very own Congressman Horsford championed a streamlined federal process for renewable energy projects, because as many developers on this call know, that time is money. And, you know, many of our talking points all center around what we call the L's. So you have land, labor, lumber, lending, litigation, all things outside our legislators, pun intended, control. But what isn't their control is those removing state barriers for land use and planning and streamlining processes. And so that's why SNHBA was very proud to support the majority leader on a number of concepts that made their way into Assembly Bill 213, which was passed by a strong bipartisan group and signed into law by the governor. So this coalition that supported the bill was probably one of the broadest I've seen, from advocates to unions to developers. And so just some highlights of the bill. Section 1.3 of the bill requires local governments to publish on their website a list of pending residential land use applications, including the length of time those applications have been pending, which is effective January 1, 2024. Section 1.6 of the bill requires local governments to prepare an annual housing report identifying, among other things, a plan to maintain and develop housing. But the key to the change in that report is it was previously just for affordable housing projects and is now for market rate housing as well for a 5-year period. And that report has now is going to be submitted not only to the Housing Division, but also the Advisory Committee on Housing, which is, I think, really important in informing the legislature of legislative processes and policies that they can implement to address those needs. Section 3 of the bill does a number of things, including requiring a local government to review a residential land use application for completeness within 10 business days after filing. Failure to do so means the application is deemed complete. Previous state law had a 3-day time limit, but this is much more realistic time frame to ensure that the overall processing timeframes are achievable and manageable, as well as transparent. Section 3 also prohibits a local government to establish any kind of preliminary application process to circumvent the review period. Section 7, 9, and 10 of the bills clarify the timeframes within a county that must review and process land use applications also apply to the cities within those counties for processing maps. And lastly, most importantly for the folks on this call, Section 12 of the bill requires a local government to adopt an ordinance by July 1, 2024 that prioritizes land use applications for affordable housing projects. And that includes an administrative approval of affordable housing projects, which I think is a huge need to combat the NIMBYism associated with special use permits or deed restrictions for affordable housing projects. We look forward to continuing our great relationship with the Nevada Housing Coalition and its amazing staff and membership as a number of these sections are implemented by our local governments in the coming months and years. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Now we'll hand it off to Wally Swenson, Vice President of Corporate Affairs in Nevada Hand, to talk a little bit about AB 62.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to begin with a scenario. Okay, so picture an affordable housing environment where the Home Investment Partnerships Program, or Home Dollars, so many acronyms right here out here, but where they're no longer available. What would that mean for our state's future of affordable housing stock? So pre-AB 62, this would have huge implications for affordable housing development in our state. Primarily the loss of property tax exemptions, which anybody in the development space knows that that's a vital component to bringing an affordable community to market. So that's where AB 62 steps in, right? This legislation is a tool that mitigates potential future barriers to our state's development of affordable housing. So to paint a clear picture, a good analogy we've been using throughout this entire process from really conception to completion is consider a highway that's expanding and adding more lanes. The result would be smoother, faster traffic. That's the impact of AB 62. It introduces additional lanes or pathways for affordable housing projects to qualify for property tax exemption. So in the past, the key to this highway was exclusive to those using home funds. AB 62 broadens that access, and the highway is now more open to, or is open to more travelers. Projects funded by low-income housing tax credits, LIHTC, state account for affordable housing trust funds, federal housing trust funds, Section 811, all these tools, right? So simply put, AB 62 creates efficiencies in financing by no longer making us solely reliant on home dollars for these exemptions. And this diversification is vital, right? We've previously, pre-AB 62, had all of our eggs in the home dollars basket. And in the past, right, if those funds vanished, we'd lose property tax exemption, which is a significant risk to building affordable housing. And so AB 62 effectively neutralizes that risk. And a lot of people have asked us, and I've heard the question asked to, coalition staff and others, like, well, what are the odds that home dollars could disappear? And the answer to that is probably not too high right now. We have an affordable housing crisis throughout the country. Currently, these funds have significant support and have been consistent since the program was founded. I think it was 1990. But the future of any federal program hinges on policy decisions. And it's possible that a program could be significantly reduced or eliminated. And so I think that point underscores the wisdom behind AB 62's diversification of funding sources for these exemptions. And home dollars come with their fair share of regulatory and compliance measures, as they should. But if home dollars are not needed for a project, because oftentimes they are a financing source, but a lot of times we also, as a developer and other developers alike, seek them or previously have sought them just for that exemption. So now they can be used for other purposes, and it's one less layer of regulatory and compliance that needs to be managed. So I would just end with saying that as we embark on a new chapter of affordable housing, it's important for us to remember that we now have a more versatile key to unlocking opportunities. It creates a broader highway for us to traverse and creates enhanced efficiencies in financing for all of our state's providers of affordable housing. AB 62 passed unanimously through the House, 42-0, and the Senate 21-0, and signed into law. We're excited that it's in place. It definitely removes barriers today and in the future, and really is risk mitigation, and just allows greater efficiency in the way that a capital stack of affordable housing can be put together.
All right. Thank you so much for recapping AB 62 for us, Wally. All right. I'm going to hand it over to Nick Vanderpool, Principal at Flynn Judici Government Affairs, to talk a little bit about AB 448.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nick Vanderpool with Flynn Judici Government Affairs, here to talk about AB 448. Basically, in a nutshell, AB 448 was how it came about was actually a story out of the Las Vegas Review-Journal that talked about a loophole as it related to the real estate transfer tax. This loophole was created in 2007, and it was unintentional, but it did create the loophole for when corporations are creating the loophole, when corporations are transferring property, that basically, in a nutshell, they were not forced to pay the real estate transfer tax. Speaker Yeager, along with the Majority Leader Hodeggy, basically looked at this and said, we're missing revenue in these deals, in these real estate transfers, and they seek to bring clarity on the on making sure that this loophole was closed. How much money was missed out between 2007 to today is still kind of an unknown number. However, in the end, it's hopeful that some of this revenue that going forward will be generated and help the housing matter. Again, it's a real estate, this is an insider baseball type real estate transactions and whatnot, but we have to applaud the speaker and the majority leader for taking forth this piece of legislation and addressing the concern and making sure that everybody in Nevada is paying their fair share in conducting business in Nevada. I gotta applaud, the realtors came forward and supported the bill. And I think to Amanda's point that she said earlier, with this coalition, there's a lot of stakeholders involved from all aspects and represent so much. And so to see so many entities working with the coalition this session, it just speaks volume. You talk about Amanda, Southern Nevada Home Builders, to the Nevada Apartment Association, to the realtors. I mean, it definitely speaks volume of what the coalition is made up of. And yeah, we don't always agree, but when we find opportunities that we can find common ground on legislation, it is very satisfying. So yeah, AB 448 passed, signed by the governor, and look forward to seeing what hopefully some revenue that can be generated from it.
Thanks so much, Nick. Certainly important to make sure that the portion of the funds from the real property transfer tax that goes into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund actually ends up deposited there. So super happy to see AB 448 make it out of the legislature. Now we'll pass it over to Mendy Elliott, Senior Vice President at Flynn Judici Government Affairs, to give us a broad overview about the NHC's activity this session and what we monitored.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Amanda. We've heard from all of our partners. We had 4 priority bills this session. We had AB 62, we had AB 310, we had 448, and then we had 213, the modernization. And I think for the Housing Coalition to have 4 of its priorities actually pass, all of our priorities, was amazing. We're fortunate to have partners that we can work with, negotiate with, and more importantly, legislators that work with us. There were a lot of bills that we looked at, reviewed, discussed with the team. We have a policy committee that reviews all of the bills. We were providing updates to them throughout the session. We were monitoring bills that weren't particular, they were not priorities for us, but they were priorities for Nevadans. For example, the Windsor Park. Many of you in Southern Nevada have heard about the Windsor Park at SB 450, Dana Neal's bill. We were monitoring that to see what impacts, what the bill was going to ultimately look like, and more importantly, how can the Housing Coalition interface as the bill becomes law? If it becomes law, how do we move forward with the bill? And many of the bills that we worked on are just that. We have a lot of work to do in the between now and the next session. I'll give you an example on, for instance, on 450. As that bill goes through the regulatory process, working with the Housing Division, you know, how can the Housing Coalition, how can we help make that a success for the residents in Windsor Park? We are we're involved in the Oakland A's bill. Many of you may not know that, but there is a $5 million waterfall provision within the SB1 bill. And what going back to AB 310, one of the things in AB 310 that were important is that it actually created a definition for supportive housing. We now have in statute an actual definition, what it looks like. And when SB1, when we had the opportunity in the special session to provide some context to what the waterfall would look like, what it would actually, if there is a waterfall, for those who don't know what a waterfall is, a waterfall comes into being if in fact there is funding left over after all of the requirements of the bonding, abatements. If there's funding left over up to $5 million, anything over $5 million goes somewhere else, but up to $5 million will help support that supportive housing mechanism down in Clark County. We were able to utilize the same definition that we put into AB 310. So now we have some consistency moving forward, not only with AB 310, but SB1. And as programs are developed down the road, we now have in statute a definition. And I think that that was something that we were really proud of, and to be part of that SB1. And our amendment, we started on the very last day at 6:30 a.m. in the morning with Christine Hess, myself, and the speaker, trying to figure out what would be a good way to amend that bill. So what's next? We're going to be monitoring all the bills. We're still monitoring the Home Means Nevada initiative, where we are with the funding. The governor's office called us earlier this week, already talking about next session. What do we want to see? So we'll be scheduling some meetings with our board and with the policy committee to make sure that we have some alignment with this administration. More importantly, as the election cycle starts, we'll be educating not only the elected officials, but potential candidates about what's important for housing. We are an advocacy organization, and just that, we provide advocacy for and education to our elected officials. I think it's really important that they're not myopic and we're not myopic, and we can try to figure out what's important to them and how it interfaces with the coalition. Bills that pass have impacts. Bills that are vetoed have impact. And we will continue to monitor all the bills and potential bill draft requests. Believe it or not, bill draft requests they'll start in July of next year. So we will be ready to go, working with Amanda and the board to make sure that the policies that the Housing Coalition creates, that we're moving forward with all of those. And I'm available for any questions. We've been providing updates along the way. I'll be honest, we had on behalf of the coalition, we had a great session, and it's because of people that you just heard from, Amanda, Brooke, Wally from Nevada Hand. All of these individuals, they're government affairs lobbyists that were in the building, worked alongside all of us to make sure that the message was loud and clear. That housing is important, and we're here to provide solutions. And more importantly, we are here to provide any education and data. Nevada Housing Coalition is great for data. We were called all the time. I didn't provide the data, but the Nevada Housing Coalition team were there in a nanosecond anytime we had a question about Colorado, Texas, Florida, Washington, you name it, and the Housing Coalition can provide the answer. So with that, Amanda, I'll turn it back over to you, but I'm available for any questions.
Thank you so much, Mendy. And we as a coalition would be remiss if we didn't thank the Flynn Judici team, the Nevada Housing Coalition Board, as well as the policy committee members for their participation and efforts this legislative session. The beauty of the coalition is that it aggregates people, stakeholders from across the board to have these conversations early on. And I think that definitely contributed to the outcomes we saw as a coalition this session. So thank you so much, Mendy. We're going to open it up for questions now from the group. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat or unmute and we can take them from there.
I think someone might be raising their hand. You can't unmute, so you will have to put your question in the Q&A board.
While we wait a little bit for some questions to come in, Brooke, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what the follow-through process might look like on the grants from the Supportive Housing Development Fund, if you're willing to speak to that.
So much, Amanda. So we're excited about the next phase of the Nevada Supportive Housing Development Fund, but that policy and rulemaking now falls with the Nevada Housing Division, and so we definitely are here as a support and a resource to the division. But they essentially will be developing what that eligibility criteria is and what it's going to take for folks to apply for that grant program. And so I know that the intent of the legislation was really for the community and the folks that are developing supportive housing to really develop the package that they need to really meet the needs of the population they want to serve. And so we hope that that intent follows through this rule-making process. But so we're definitely looking forward to the Housing Division and kind of how they roll out this program.
Yes, partnerships across the board are certainly important here.
Yeah, and Amanda, real quick, kind of to Brooke's point, I remember, when we were, lobbying on this AB 310, it definitely, in my conversations since session concluded, I've talked to rural communities and cities, and they're very interested since this is a statewide initiative. And so there's definitely interest out there of how this can, I think like the rural mayors, for example, are just, they thought it was just a Washoe and Clark thing. And I go, no, this is statewide. If you have programs, if you have programs in your community, they can submit a grant request and get on board and get some of the supportive services in their community. So it did resonate. And again, kudos to Brooke. I mean, this was, I remember working on AB 310, and when it was finally got its hearing and passed out of committee, I think I saw tears of joy right there. And so and getting it signed by the governor was definitely a massive achievement. So now it's prove the results and get these funds to these communities across Nevada. So it definitely was, it's an exciting time for sure.
Certainly, and definitely a huge thank you to Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno and Governor Lombardo for their work on that bill. All right. Looks like questions in the chat were answered.
We did have one come through in the Q&A box. Mindy, this might be a question for you. Sherry Lynn is asking if you can explain a little bit more about the ACE Stadium and how the funding from this will be used for supportive housing.
The waterfall, is that what you said, the waterfall?
Yeah.
The $5 million, that will go to the Clark County. They have a fund already in place for supportive housing. That waterfall, if there is funding, will roll into Clark County. The SB 1 bill, everything is only for Southern Nevada, just so everyone knows. Nothing for the north or for the rurals. But if the funds go in, our vision is to really support Brooks vision on AB 310 and that AB 310 support for supportive housing services for those that are 30% AMI or less. It's going to be down the road. It won't be right away because they have to first take care of all of the required funding, payback, abatements, so on and so forth. But once they have, once they've paid back and complied with everything per SB1, and if there is any funding in the waterfall, think about it, the waterfall, they call it a waterfall because it's funding coming through down the river, and all of a sudden now we have extra money. And if we do have extra money, then that will go to Clark County, to the fund that's already in existence. We didn't create a new mechanism, and it will continue to support individuals that need it. I hope that explains it.
If I can add real quick, I
Sure,
think
Nick.
for point of clarification for the attendees is when SB1 came out, and Mindy kind of just hit on it, the waterfall fund that was created was very broad in terms. And so we approached the speaker because in a special session, the only person that can amend a bill is the speaker and the majority leader, the Senate majority leader. And so basically what we said was, why reinvent the wheel when we already have a fund in Clark County? And so he saw what we were trying to say and said, yes, you're right. If there is additional funds in the waterfall, that those monies, that revenue should go right into an existing fund and just complement it, rather than just say, oh, we have $5 million, if that's a number, we have $5 million, what are we going to do with it? Now it's in statute of where that money goes. And so it gives clear direction should there be additional revenue. So hopefully that's helpful to everybody.
Thanks, Nick. And certainly your point about not reinventing the wheel. I think even with AB 448 in the loophole, that's certainly evident there too. We just wanted to make sure that the money that was intended to be deposited in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund actually made it there. And because of all that loss from the loophole, after this legislative session, since that's closed now, we'll be able to see more funds deposited into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So more capital. And I think we might be able to end early, but I'll round it out with one final point. Wally, I liked your point about your highway metaphor and what the efficiency means for affordable housing development. I think something that might be a continued conversation would still be gaps in financing. Is that a conversation that you're expecting to have, or that you see significant challenges in?
I think absolutely. And I think that's not unique to Nevada Hand or any other developer in Nevada or throughout the nation, right? I mean, rising costs, supply chain issues. It's some places it's $300,000 a unit to build, where 2 years ago it might have been 200,000, right? I mean, it kind of varies, a lot of factors there. But yeah, I mean, gap financing is a crucial element to it. So, I mean, many of us could teach this better than I can, and some maybe this is new to them, but just kind of to do a quick overview, like the cost of development, right? The reason that the development of housing is so expensive, I guess I should say it that way, land acquisition, whether it's construction, rehab, the professional services, whether it's architects, engineers, various fees, like that's the overall cost of development. And then we have our traditional sources of funding, and that's LIHTC, could be public housing funds, other forms of debt or equity financing. But these sources don't typically cover the total cost of developing housing. And that's where that gap comes in, right? So the difference between the cost of development and the funds that can be obtained from these traditional sources. I know it sounds like financing 101, but I remember my first day in the housing space 10 years ago. I was like, that makes a lot of sense. Like, not something that anybody laid out for me, but you get there at the end of the day. And so it bridges that gap. What's interesting about home dollars, right, is that they're kind of both, depending on how they're used. So as traditional funding, home dollars can be used as a primary source of funding. And it can be building, buying, rehabbing housing, or providing direct rental assistance to low-income individuals and families. But on the other hand, home dollars are often used as gap financing. And so yes, it's something that we're thinking about a lot. I think that that gap is getting bigger. It's ensuring that, I think I saw someone from the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition on here. I think I saw them type their name, but that's why treating light tech is precious, right? I mean, the fact that it is population based, I mean, everything's relative. But us, if we're lucky enough to get 2 allocations of credits, right? I mean, you're building 2 developments a year. We're limited in what we can build. Financing at the end of the day is finite. And whenever we talk about affordable housing, it's really 3 things, right? It's land, zoning, and most importantly, the financing of it, because this stuff is not cheap. And the gap of what we need is sadly only growing, right? It's not unique to Nevada. I think we're doing, we have a lot of great players in this space now. We're doing a lot of really good things to lead us to close that gap, but expanding pathways, treating land as precious, a lot of those things. And so that gap in the financing, I hope that that curbs a little bit, and we see that cost of development go down. There are a lot of factors, right? Like more available land, supply and demand, land costs may reduce a little bit. Some of it's just supply chain though. So it's a challenge that we deal with and I think about and our team talks about every single day, because it is a big barrier to the future. It just kind of depends somewhat on market conditions and somewhat what we can control as affordable housing advocates.
Yeah, thank you so much for that perspective. Well, with that, I think we kind of covered a lot of the Housing Coalition priorities this legislative session. Thank you to our panelists for being willing to participate, and for attendees. I'm sure it might be evident that housing is a very complicated issue and it touches there's many different policy subsets to this. So the coalition is here to have these continued conversations from the day of the first session to sine die and afterward into the interim. So thank you so much. If you're not a coalition member, please consider joining. And if you are a member, you should have received our legislative session final report recap, and you can find a lot of the information we covered today in that report. And with that, I think we can sign off.